Clerk Segris, call the roll.
Trustee Anthony.
Present.
Trustee Foster.
Good evening.
Trustee Graham-Hudek.
Good evening.
The record reflect that Clerk Segrist is in attendance. Treasurer Slavens.
Good evening.
Trustee Snyderman.
Present.
And Supervisor Williams.
Hello, good evening. I'd like to call for a motion to adopt the agenda with one change, and that is to add a closed session after the study session has been completed.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We've got two items on the agenda this evening for the study session. First up is Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA Transition Plan, and then a Capital Improvement Plan presentation. And with that, we'll turn it over to Corrine to lead us through the material. And
Thank you. I know this presentation has been a long time in the coming. The plan has taken many years to put together. I think it was started long before I got here. So our end result and our hope is that at the end of this, that the Township Board would adopt the ADA transition plan. And just because it's taken us a long time to get here doesn't mean we haven't done anything in the meantime. So I think you'll see that throughout the presentation tonight. This project plan was, a lot of people participated in it. We had outside help from Accessology, Spalding Detector, A3C Collaborative Architecture, Canton Township employees, and members from the Canton community. So it's been a collaborative effort of soliciting input and expertise in order to get to a plan that we think we can adopt. Introductions tonight, obviously you know who I am. We do have Barb Roulette, who is here, Brad Sharp is here, and Robin, who is someone from the community who's been very instrumental and helpful in providing very valuable input into the plan, and we appreciate her perspective. And Greg Holmberger has also helped us with this plan, and a great group of people under his leadership have helped put a lot of time and energy into this. The purpose is obviously to give you a highlight of this 243-page document. It can be found on the website, so if you're really interested in reading all the nuts and bolts of it, it is there. I'll go over some of the federal regulations, the self-evaluation, our draft transition plan, next steps, and certainly be open for questions at the end. The purpose of the transition plan is really to identify our deficiencies throughout Canton Township's policies, procedures, practices, and physical assets. And this plan really provides the guidance for removing the accessibility barriers throughout the township. It gives us a working document in which we can address many of those issues. It also outlines the progress that has been made to date and identifies steps that we need to take place in the future. The plan is intended to be our roadmap. It's a living document. It's something that we will implement, not just stick on a shelf. It's important to us. It helps us address the things that are maybe not as up to speed as we want them to today, and hopefully we'll not have those things going forward. The requirements, we were required to develop a grievance procedure. You'll see we had that in place. We had to identify an individual. You'll see that's me. The Canton Township perform and retain a self-evaluation and transition plan. That's what you're seeing here tonight. And not only develop the plan, but also put them into place. It requires individuals with disabilities not be excluded from our programs, our services, and activities. That our facilities be free of architectural and communication barriers. Accessibility features must be maintained, so not only do we get to implement them, but we better maintain them as well. And it requires that we provide opportunities for interested persons and groups to participate in the development of the plan. It does not require that every facility that we own be barrier-free as long as access to individual programs, activities, and services is provided. And you'll see that happens a lot at the summit. We make things available that in a wide variety of ways. So we the plan actually identifies physical obstacles that limited the accessibility. We had 38 sites that were reviewed, and detailed descriptions of the methods to be used to make the facilities accessible are included in the plan. There's a lot of Excel spreadsheets. This attempt tonight is to give you a snapshot of what that looks like and what we need going forward in order to bring us into compliance. It outlines an implementation plan and those action logs, and we've got initial budgets, which you'll see actually flow into your CIP tonight, so the timing of both of those together was pretty good. I am the ADA coordinator. As I said, we had a team of people, but we also have an internal team of designees, one from each department. And then we have a community team, interested members of the community. We had initial areas of concern were identified in 2017. We had an initial meeting with community members. We then did a survey for feedback. There was a draft plan review and input. We gave the public notice in February. We had the public meeting in March. We then had an accessibility advisory committee. That's what we've called the committee. In May, we had website development. We were going online with a new website. And we had a team of people that reviewed that so that we could see if we were in compliance. And then we have set, as a result of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, we'll be having biannual public review meetings. That committee really, when we met, we decided that once the CIP was in place and we actually had projects that we knew were identified and funded, that it would be the appropriate time to pull in the advisory committee for their guidance and input into the development of those projects. On the front end, and then also as we've implemented them towards the tail end of it to make sure things are in compliance, if we've missed anything or we need to add anything to our plan. The ADA coordinator contact information, this is, we had some of these things were not visible on our website, some of the things we needed to improve. The ADA grievance process and form with an appeal process, it's been reviewed and updated. We have a reasonable accommodation request policy procedure form, which we've made online, so people can get online and request whatever accommodations they may need. We had a service animal guidance for reasonable accommodations that needed to be improved. We've passed a policy on that. The retaliation and coercion policy, the ADA non-discrimination clause needed to be more visible. Our public notice statement, we reviewed the existing statement. It was in compliance. The 80-day assurance, that's for federal funding recipients. Wendy worked with us on that to make sure that that was passed. And we have an alternate format policy, which you can also file online. So if you needed something in a format that we don't currently offer, there's a way to apply for that online as well through the ADA accommodations, and we can make those available to you. The board, commission, and committees we've been reviewing and trying to develop new training that will help all of the boards and commissions with regards to that component. Website improvements, as we said, we launched it. We had a team of people that helped work through some of the tweaks. There are still things that are ongoing. Program and eligibility requirements, that goes on all the time as we make new programs. We are always looking to improve them. And then there's a component which is the emergency management plan. We know there are components that need to be updated in that plan, so that's an ongoing process. As I said, we had the website update. You'll see in the next slides, we'll talk about some of the enhancements that were there, but there is a screen reader. It is accessible. We did launch the new one in June. We did have people review it, so we think it's worked fairly well. The improvements call out where the ADA coordinator is so that we shouldn't have people trying to look for how do they get an accommodation, who do they contact, what do they need. And it's visible several places on the website. You'll see it shows up, this is a little bit of the older one, but the color is just different. The ADA coordinator, launches back to that page. You can ask for accommodations, the accommodation request form. Behind that accommodation request form, when you request it, as the ADA coordinator, it'll come to me, but it also, based on what type of accommodation someone might be asking for, it goes directly to those individuals who'd be responsible in those areas. So we do have a process of making sure that the right people are involved and that it's circled back to close things out when they're done. Again, the ADA accommodation request form, so we've updated those types of things to make it more easily found on our website. The transition plan did a building review. We reviewed 19 buildings within the township. They were evaluated by the AC3 group. And the items that really they identify are the building entrances, the interior routes, including the doors, hallways, public areas, break rooms, drinking fountains, and public telephones. So here's the list of the 19 buildings that were evaluated. In the transition plan, you'll find that we rank these sites in the following to take into consideration, you know, the property, the building, how often the public visits it. Is it something that we don't use very often? Is it more highly visible? Are they polling locations? That was important. And employee activity. So how much do we utilize these things? Projects will be conducted in priority order, and they're coordinated with the CIP, which you'll see a little bit later tonight. They were in 3 different priorities. The high priority was access to the facility. That was important to ensure that all persons had the ability to enter our facilities. And the medium priority was to achieve and make sure that our services, programs, and activities at those facilities, including restaurants, were at least provided in one location. And then the lower priorities were things that were a little bit later, which represent small deviations from codes or standards that we didn't find that were deemed to be lower on the priority list, not something that would be really critical if we didn't do today, but could be pushed back a little bit later. We looked at 10 different parks, and when we did that, we looked at the amenities, the concessions, the restrooms, the site access. These are the parks that are here. There is a project that's going on in Heritage Park that will be upcoming. There'll be a meeting on October 10th, rain date on October 17th. It'll be on site at 10 o'clock, and it will be one that we've invited people with disabilities to come and provide their input. You know, how the site looks, what types of amenities we're putting in, that type of thing, so that we can make sure that we've got the input right at the front of that project. So as we said, the project hasn't come before you, but we're still working through the things that we know are important. Interior improvements that need to be done in general for the building, signage, countertop heights, bathroom partitions, sink accessibility, drinking fountains, and miscellaneous things that are throughout the building. There's 29 different, we'll call sub-sites or projects that have been identified. The estimated cost, there are 2 slides here on cost, and I did that because one is in the ADA transition plan. So if you look at it and you want to see that number is in the plan. So the $1.14 or $94 billion is in the plan, but there is actually work that either has been done or that is not being covered in our CIP. So the next slide you'll see, and we break it up into site assessment, building, and playground assessment. So kind of those are the 3 areas that they fall in. So when you look at this one, this is what you'll see in the CIP later today, is the $1,090,000. This is broken up over 5 years. The things that aren't in there are the Arctic Edge Fire Station number 2 and intersections and crosswalks. So those are things that were originally in the larger number but have been pulled out because either handled in another project or in some other way. So when those 2 numbers don't match, that's why. Signalized intersections. This is something we heard a lot with public input. You'll see sidewalks is the other most popular thing. Unfortunately, with the township, we don't own the roads, so it really is a cooperative effort with Wayne County and the state of Michigan to address. They are under the same federal requirements that we are, and so it really is our commitment to the community to make sure that the township is accessible by maintaining those cooperative partnerships, either through funding, through maintenance, through wider ways, and working cooperatively with them when projects do come forward. And obviously with the road millage, we'll have lots of opportunities to do that, even maybe in a greater way than we might have otherwise. Maintenance and alterations, there's a distinction between alterations. When you have alterations, you must include curb ramps. When you're doing maintenance, you don't. So sometimes you'll see that the Department of Justice regulations require the planning, design, and construction to integrate into this. And that's where we'll probably see a lot of the construction standards and things like that had been modified and are being adhered to. This was an easy example, I think, for people to see what the difference between maintenance versus alteration. So if we're just joint crack seals or we're just doing a repair, it's clearly maintenance. It doesn't require the curb ramps. However, when we are doing a mill and fill, or the county is, whether we are, the state, the county, that's when you're required to do the curb ramps. So some people will say, well, why isn't it being done? Depends on the type of project and that's being constructed. So what about sidewalks and corridors? This has been popular. In 1998, the Michigan Supreme Court made sidewalks within the townships the responsibility of the township. Canton Township passed a sidewalk ordinance in '99. The ordinance outlines the criteria to assess and determine needed repairs in sidewalks. And in '99, they commenced sidewalk repair program, which continues to this day. There's about $500,000, I think, that's allocated for sidewalk repairs throughout the township. So it's a pretty significant contribution into that. And from 1999 to 2013, they have assessed and made repairs to sidewalks in all of the platted subdivisions, the sidewalks in residential areas in the district, or in the distinct targeted geographical zones, and any sidewalks where we get complaints each year that lie outside of the targeted zones. So there's a very active program for sidewalk improvements. And then they extended these two primary roads. But what we find, I think on the next slide, is, it'll be the next slide too. So there is annually $500,000. The inspection covers well over 30 miles of sidewalk. And repair averages for the year is about 5 miles of sidewalk, which is quite a significant amount. The most challenging part is where we get the most concerns, if it isn't from a deviation in how the construction of the sidewalks are, is in the gap. So we'll find if you go along Cherry Hill and you're headed west, you will reach a point where there are no sidewalks. It's because we don't own the sidewalk, we don't own the right-of-way. So where the township has the opportunity to gain the right-of-way, they have. Where they don't, there's a gap. And so when there is development or there's the opportunity to secure that right-of-way, the township makes an honest effort to do that so that we can connect. And that is on the forefront of all of our plates to make sure that we can connect our community. As I said, in order to construct new sidewalks, we need the right-of-way, design, permit, and construct. So the right-of-way is the main thing that will prohibit us from being able to connect to our community. The transition plan and what's next. We solicited the community input. We held the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting. We did the website improvements. We've made improvements that we've talked about previously. Tonight, we're conducting the study session. Tonight, there will be a CIP plan, which incorporates the items that have been identified. And the next step, there's not a number there, it might not be till October, I didn't know, which was to request the Township Board to adopt the transition plan. And then, as we said before, we commit to meeting with holding our community meetings with our Accessibility and Advisory Committee in the late fall, once the CIP is developed and we start into the concepts and getting our projects underway, and then again in the spring. That's not to say we won't have additional meetings. It will depend on the project and what may be going on, but those are the two commitments we did make in our Accessibility Committee meeting, so that we would have the input both on the front end and on the tail end of it. Again, it's a living document. We expect that it will change. We expect that many of those things will be taken off the list. A 5-year plan, when you're looking at other communities, we sit pretty well. Many communities don't have an ADA transition plan. The legislation's been in place for a long time, and I know the township's been working on this plan for a long time, so the hat's off to many of them who've spent countless hours and years before I got here getting to this point. So that's really where our next steps are. If anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Maybe before we do board questions, maybe, is there any public comment or additional staff comment? Any public comment? Robin? Sure, if you'd like to. Well, could you come to the podium? Folks watching at home, they'll be able to hear you.
Before I have the chance, get some airtime.
Robin, what I'm asking is that you say your name and address. And try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. I don't know how much time you need, but
Okay.
need a little bit more. I think you won't
Well, thank you. I'll make it brief. My name is Robin Bennett, and I live at 2105 North Shelton Road, right behind Mexican Fiesta, where everything is covered in cheese and delicious. I just want, sorry, I get nervous. I don't know why. I just want to thank Canton Township for, as Corinne said, making a step that many other communities feel like, we don't need to do. We don't need to do that right now. Or they put it off or put it on the back burner. So I do applaud that. And I'm glad to see that there is an increase in involving people with disabilities, especially in the matters that are going to directly affect us, like the ADA transition plan. I would encourage just to go a step further and make sure that at every stage there are representatives from the disability community at the table. And even a step further than that, making sure that individuals with disabilities are at every decision-making table, whether that means that they are invited more deliberately to be a part of things like board meetings, trustee meetings, or maybe I should just run for trustee, and we'll solve that problem. But I do want to say that people with disabilities are a fabric of every community. Let's make them able to access, and as Corinne greatly put it in this slideshow, make Canton community a community without barriers, not only in construction, playgrounds, but also in our meetings, in what we talk about, in our businesses, in the jobs that our employees offer. Let's make sure that people with disabilities are represented just as evenly as everybody else, because we are, at the end of it all, everybody else. We're part of this fabric. So I want to thank you again, and I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Questions from the board? Summer?
Thank you, Corinne, for the plan. I think it looked really good. I could tell you put a lot of hard work into it and a lot of community meetings. Just a couple of quick questions. You mentioned that you were going to do the advisory committee. Do you have like a formal structure of the committee that you're proposing, or just where do you think?
We originally, when we met back in August of 2017, there was a group of people that were interested. They signed up. They indicated that they wanted to be a part of a subcommittee going forward. When we had the public meeting for the larger group, we invited the public back earlier this year. It was a larger group. We didn't narrow it down to the subcommittee level. The recommendation was that we had made that commitment back in 2017, which we did. Instead of, so we went back to the drawing board. We said, all right, we'll invite those people. The challenge with that is sometimes getting all those people there, we don't always get the number of people that we want. So the structure really right now is John Lefevre and I co-chair it. And the intent, we had our first meeting kind of to figure out where it was going to go and where we could best utilize the expertise around the table. And at that time, we talked about needing to get our hands around, get the transition plan put into place, and then get the CIP to support the projects, and then incorporating the individual. So everybody's had the opportunity since well before March to review the ADA transition plan and provide feedback, and through a survey provided feedback as well. So we solicited that input with the hopes that we would have a plan that was pretty solid. So when we did those projects, the projects would drive the incorporation and the need to have that advisory committee. If there are other people that wish to participate, we are certainly open to that. They just need to contact me. The more the merrier. We really, there's no restrictions to that.
To that end, maybe we can run a call for the committee and the focus. That way it goes out to everybody.
Absolutely.
Put together a brief article or summary of what you're looking for. We'll get it included in the focus.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing the outreach to the community as you were putting the plan together, just figuring out how to involve people over the next 4 or 5 years as it's being implemented. The next question, and I don't know if it's a question for you or if it's a question for Jade, but as we are doing construction on Ford Road, will we be doing like the ADA signals and things like that along that stretch of road? Or is that something that we're planning to do?
Hey, Josh? Could you share the microphone with Jade? Next time. Next question.
They do fall under the same regulations that we do, so they should be adhering to them. And as I said in the presentation, it really is our partnership and our efforts to push them to make sure that they do comply.
Very much.
Steve?
Thanks for the presentation. I've been looking forward to it. The 29, I think it was 29 different projects that when I went through the capital improvement plan, I saw ADA a lot. So are all of those in the capital?
Yes, with the exceptions that the ones that I pulled out of there, so the original dollar amount of the 1.1 million versus the 1,090,000. So they are, and what you'll see is we've put them in the most efficient manner. So if we're working on a particular area, we might have been, maybe we're having a particular type of contractor, or we're putting a specific project together. We've tried to incorporate the things that most make sense, and in a fashion that we can manage the project within the year, and also within the funding structure over that 5-year period of time.
And I'm sorry if I missed this, but is there federal or state funding for ADA that we receive?
Don't directly receive federal funding just for ADA, but you'll see sometimes where community development block grant funds can be used in that format. Sometimes there are grants available. This community is very good at soliciting and looking for grants. So where there are those opportunities, we certainly do seek them. I think
That are going to ADA projects? Okay. And lastly, just curious, you mentioned other communities are far behind in doing something like this. Is there a penalty to them for not doing it?
I don't think anybody's ever imposed that. You know, they come out with a regulation, they say they're going to do certain things, but we have not been put into that position. We wanted to be ahead of that. We haven't been put in that position. When we did a look throughout the state, I think if we had a handful of them that actually had ADA transition plans, we were lucky. The group that helped us on the ADA transition plan was from out of state to help us through that. Accessology was out of Texas? Texas.
Oh,
So we relied on their expertise and what they've done across the country.
thank you.
Great presentation, and my questions actually were answered, so thank you.
Greg, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to make a note when you were talking about potential penalties, that sort of stuff. It wouldn't come with a financial penalty, but it is an accreditation standard for us as well. So, and that is of all the standards, that's the one that we missed when we came through. And I've been on accreditation site visits to 2 other municipalities in the last 2 years, and both of those municipalities missed also.
Won't next time.
That is correct.
Let's hope so.
So now I don't see engineering here, but you did have a slide on the GAP program. And you said one of the challenges is obtaining right-of-way. So the sidewalk ordinance, which to some degree puts the onus of repair and maintenance on the homeowner or the property owner, is that a barrier to obtaining right-of-way? I would assume it's probably more, it's substantially less expensive to not have a sidewalk, because you don't have to maintain the sidewalk. I mean,
Yeah, so in regards to the right-of-way, we'd have to go out and actually expend some dollars to acquire access to the right-of-way, then to get the sidewalk in. You will see portions of the city or the township where we have acquired it and we are putting in the sidewalks. And then we are putting together right now an active map that'll show where our gaps are. and then aligning that with what is county-owned and then what is privately owned, so we actually can put a plan together to acquire those right-of-ways for that sidewalk continuation. Prime example is on Sheldon Road. You'll notice that there was an extension of the sidewalk, and it just kind of came to a complete stop. Well, there is actually a grant that was being applied for, too, to actually go over the drain there as well. So we were able to extend it there, and then once the grant comes in, we'll be able to go over the drain as well. So we are actively working on it, and we are putting together that map. And I just had one more comment on the grant thing as well, that a lot of times you may not get dollars for grants, but a lot of it is scored, especially through the state with like passport grants and DNR grants. You actually get points for having ADA accessible amenities within your project. So in a way, the dollars aren't necessarily just because it's ADA compliant, but it has it's weighted really high. Well, so when you apply for a grant, and Greg, you can jump in at any time too, but when you apply for the grant through the state, it has a whole slew of criteria in different areas, and each area is weighted, and then they score it, and it's strictly on a scoring process is how they award those grants.
Some COG TAP grants are very similar. They're looking for more mobility.
No further questions.
Very good. John, anything? Anne Marie?
Thanks for the presentation. Thank you. It was very good. Robin, thank you also. And so you want to run for something. We'll have to talk about that later. But what was interesting is I know when you were here before, one of the issues that you had was getting here to the meetings at 7 because the transportation stops at a certain point. Have we resolved that at all? Or are we looking, maybe we could even look at on meeting dates, we shift the transportation day a little so people
We
can.
did expand our hours, right? We shifted the hours, so when we joined Nankin, we go to 5:30 daily, I believe, or what is the evening cutoff?
I believe it's 5 o'clock. Yeah, we were able to pick up a little bit earlier, about a half hour earlier and a half hour later, and then expanded our, where we can go to as well.
I mean, Rob, you could answer this, or would you, if maybe on days that we do have meetings like this, could we shift the day? Like start later on a Tuesday so people could make board meeting if we had enough interest?
What we're able to do with Nankin is currently we're able to, for special things, like if we have an evening meeting, if we know in advance, they're typically able to schedule a driver to bring people to those meetings. That's what we've done for the past couple of ADA focus group meetings that we've done. To do a regular service, like on every Tuesday night or that type of thing, we would need to work with the 4 other communities that are in the Nankin transit program to be able to kind of get approval of that, because there is an oversight board for that, of which Canton Township is 1 vote on there, so we would need to be able to do that, and we would probably need to be able to pay for that as well, because it would be an expense for evening service.
Maybe we could see what kind of interest we would want in something like that, you know? Like if Robin wanted to come every planning commission meeting.
It might be complicated to shift service. It would affect people who are going to work in the morning, using the rides go to work, so it would affect them negatively. Plus, this special service, I appreciate it's good for ADA stuff, but I like to be involved in every aspect of my community, not just the disability relief stuff.
Yep. So let's think of some alternatives there. Maybe we could even get a grant for it to be on meeting nights, that we have the bus like we did tonight, not just on ADA
Yeah, we can
nights.
certainly explore that.
What's really timely about this is at work today. So what they're doing is some engineers will go out and they'll recruit people to different universities. Well, they're also training some of us to recruit people with disabilities. And we had a speaker today come, and he spoke about work-life motivational speaker, and he talked about how to recruit and retrain employees with disabilities. And I thought that some of the statistics that he gave were interesting. So 20% of the population is disabled and growing in the United States. There's a 40% employment rate of those who are disabled. 55% will be disabled by the time they retire. So while they're working, they become disabled. And 78% disclose and believe they can. that they're able to disclose there. They feel okay that they won't feel repercussions if they do. But what's interesting is I know we have, we do not discriminate against people with disabilities for recruiting them, but maybe we could look at even, I'm being trained for a virtual recruitment fairs, which also affects people with disabilities. So you attend these fairs and they don't have to be there. It's just basically done virtually. And these fairs are already set up. You just become a participant, so you try to get people more with disabilities into your employment process. And also, I know that some of our jobs that we post, we do say what the requirements are in terms of have to lift or something like that. And I think are we pretty compliant with making sure we do that so the people, like some of our jobs in the summit, could be used, the greeters and the people that work at the desk, the front desks. Okay.
We're very, not only, that's only happened in the last several years that we have added the ADA component to it, so it is in compliance. But the other side is that we do make accommodations too. So if someone comes in and they were able to do a good portion of the job, but may not be able to do it all, and we may be able to accommodate them by some way, shape, or form, we're certainly open to that too. So that does happen. We will find someone who may need an accommodation. And that's not only someone who hasn't worked for us, but even employees that do work for us. So we make those accommodations. They go through our office, and we work with the departments to make sure that we can accommodate those.
That's great, yeah, that's a good idea. Great, and that's what he talked about also, making the accommodations for people who come in and can do most of the work. Another thing we talked about was, so crosswalks. So we know that a lot of our crosswalks are faded, and we know they're under the state and the county. Are they required to keep those maintained better than they do? Do you know?
I am actually not sure what the requirements are for that. I know that there's reflective requirements when they put it down, but I don't know how often they have to maintain that.
Okay, because I know at Ford and Canton Center, a lot of those are really faded. And so that would be, if we brightened them up like they're a little bit more, it might help. I know that a lot of the new streets that are being put in, they really paint them yellow and white, so they're very visible.
I'll look into that.
And then it's interesting, we've started asking the Planning Commission, I know we're creating a lot of adult areas, for active adults, we call them. And the developers, we've asked them, are you creating any ADA or ADA compliant apartments? Because people, if you're,
Accessibility, first floor accessibility.
right, because if you go in when you're 55, in 5-10 years, you might need to be in a wheelchair or walker, and they say that they're available right away if people ask them. So I don't know, I know we can't legally say that. Maybe we start encouraging people to at least have 1 or 2 units that people can grow into, and, because then people feel more included. Another last part is, it's interesting, I heard that in Ann Arbor, that you can ticket people who park in disability spots, so that if somebody comes up who's disabled and someone who's non-disabled is taking up the spot, supposedly they can take a picture and send it into the police station. And by just knowing that kind of discourages people. Have you ever heard of that, Josh?
I have not, no. That would certainly be something we would have to work out with the prosecutor in the court.
They say it's helped to reduce people parking in those spots so that when they're needed, people can use them. Okay.
Yeah, we encourage people to report it, and we'll send an officer as soon as we get it reported and address it.
All right, well, thank you.
Very good. Seeing no other questions or comments, thank you, Corinne. Well done. Okay, now we're going to segue into second agenda item is capital improvement plan presentation. We have Wendy leading us, and Wendy, where are you going to drive from there?
Okay, you're going to drive. I don't know how to get you back, though.
Guys, go online to look at the ADA plan. It is long and expansive, but there's a lot of good information in there and how to, community should do and does. Robin, do you want to stay for the next half, or you're more than welcome to go or stay? It's up to you.
I'd be interested to.
Okay, you're more than happy to stay. Yeah, it's great you're here.
All right. Thank you guys very much. So as you recall, back in 2016, we started a project, and we had hired OHM to come in to help us look at our existing infrastructure needs. As you're aware, back in the late 2008, 9, 10, we started the recession, and one of the things that we cut back on was repairing our existing capital needs. And as we are continuing to move forward, our infrastructure is still aging, it's not getting any younger, and we need to make some improvements to.
Little feedback and odd vibration throughout the
Okay.
room.
Who's it present?
It's your
Is it
voice.
me? Is it my voice? I have
I think it was my phone
Okay.
vibrating. Wasn't
I
mine.
think Josh
We all
just
texted.
adjusted or something happened there that it just stopped, so
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
take it on the road.
Anyway, so we were trying to identify all the capital needs that we have, because every year we've been looking at our budget and trying to identify what are our needs as a township to try to fix that. So we wanted to get a handle on that. We had initially tried to have our internal staff work on this, and we have so much infrastructure, there was no way we could do this internally and get through all of our buildings to figure out where we were. So the goal at the end of the day of this whole capital improvement plan and the packet that we are going to ask you guys to hopefully adopt, accept, if you will, at a future meeting, is to give staff a general direction on where we, as a township, can head on some of our capital needs that we have, knowing that it's just a roadmap. It's just to help give us the direction. All of the individual items are still going to have to come back before the board, and some things can change. So this is going to be a document, a fluid document that's going to be updated every year, so we can kind of see what our needs are for 5 years out from here on out. So today, I already just kind of gave you the background of the project. We're going to go through a more detailed example of one location, just so you could kind of understand why it took so long for us to get this in front of you guys. We're going to talk about the total infrastructure needs and then talk about a potential funding plan. So when we had OHM come in here to take a look at this, we originally hired them in 2016. They looked at the existing infrastructure at 30 locations. So the various parks, the buildings that we currently own. And again, this is existing, not any expansions or any other wish list. This is just to keep our current capital up to the existing levels that they need to be or get them caught up. OHM also looked at all of the items and prioritized them based on the conditions. So they'd rate them, you know, a 1 means it really is in good shape, and a 3 means it needs to be replaced right away for whatever the needs are. So what's the criteria and the priority of that? So if a heating unit is failing in a building, that's more important than replacing the carpet. Those types of items, it took a look at those. Canton Township team reviewed the results of that. So Sarah was on the team, Sarah Clay, who's sitting here next to me. She was part of the team, as well as Brad Sharp was part of the team. Bill Surchak from engineering and Deb Janis from finance was part of this team. They went over all of the results from this. There were hundreds of lines in each individual location. So the one we're going to show you in a minute was the Village Theater. The Village Theater alone had 700 lines. So when you look at Village Theater of 700 lines, and then you also have to look at the Summit, this is why it took so long, because staff had to go through each individual spreadsheet. They went down to room by room. There's a scuff on this wall. This scuff needs to be repaired. So this staff went through every single one of these spreadsheets and said, this scuff is a maintenance item. We can do that within our maintenance budget. That's not really capital. So they went through all of these items and identified, was it maintenance or is it capital? And it took a very long time. They met every week for the greater part of a year and a half.
Over a year.
Going through it. They had met for a couple hours every Wednesday. And then after they went through it, met with all of the departments. They met with all of the departments to get them on the same page with, do you agree with these items? Is there anything we missed? And here's the priority that's been identified, to make sure everybody was on the same page with all the buildings and whatnot. And then we came up with the final product. Did I miss anything? Okay.
Good summary.
Okay. So this is a very small example. Again, this is a Village Theater. So this is what you can see that was prepared by OHM. So it showed us that there was some minor finish scuffing. If you kind of go the third column over of the white, there's minor finish scuffing. We said that's really a maintenance item. So you can see on the far right where it has M's, we said those two are small areas of the lamination. That's a maintenance item. But then we've got replaced floor finish for $10,000, that's capital. Replace another wall covering, there's a $21,000, replace carpet, $22,000. So, and it went by the theater vestibule, 102, lobby, 103. So they really went room by room. It's a very small example. If you care to see all the detail, we can show you, but we just wanted you to kind of understand, this is really why it took as long as it did, was because there's a lot of detail. So after going through all of these items, this is what came out of it. It came up with a plan that needed to be done for the Village Theater, this one, for example. So the items in 2019 are the items that have been budgeted and we're planning on replacing already in 2019. We made sure that even though some of the items they identified as being very important and critical, if they weren't done in 2019, we put them in 2020 because they may have said they should be done in 2019. So, for example, Village Theater, the total was $40,000. For 2020, they're saying we need $365,000. That's for seating. There was some mechanical and lighting systems that need upgrading, and then the ADA transition plan that we just saw was worked into the Village Theater in this line item. And it goes on, the floors and carpeting in 2021 for $42,000, the, rehearsal room, vinyl wall covering, and some drinking fountains and whatnot in 2023. So they went through this scenario, and this is a very small one for 30 properties. And so it took a lot of time. So this leads, and I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at, or all of you, the capital improvement, the draft that we had sent over, but this is a summary. Hopefully you have looked at it, so if you have questions on it, we can cover some of it. But here's the 30 locations. The little asterisk I put on that from the 30 locations is we did add Fire Station 2 here. That was not reviewed as part of the plan because we knew there was going to be the new build of that plan. So that was added just exactly what the board approved. And we did put it in 2020 since the majority of it was going to be done in 2020, the reality of that. So we added that here. So when we were talking over like a 22 million, and when we had talked briefly, it's up from that because I added the fire station to it, $6.5 million in here. So at the top, I'm really going to focus on the top 5 locations because this makes up, I didn't write down the percentage, but I think this made up about about 70% of the total capital improvement plan. We had fire station number 2 at $6.5 million. Summit on the Park came in at $5.3 million. The largest pieces of that was there's 2 separate roofs that need to be repaired there. There's the copper roof and then another roof. One of them was $1 million, one was valued at $1.2 million. Obviously, what the cost that got in there was replacing what we have with current similar materials. When we go through the bidding process, there's going to be options that are going to be brought before the board. If there's a cheaper alternative to some of these solutions, we will bring those before the board so the board can make the ultimate decision on what we want to replace the current needs with. But right now, it's in there, $2.3 million total. There's also the other large items are rooftop units and boilers at the Summit on the Park. The boiler alone was about $770,000, the need there. Victory Park was identified at about $3.5 million worth of needs. The ball field lights are $1.2 million of that. And Director Hohenberger can speak to some of those if you have questions or want to understand those. And maybe you do want to speak to that. The lights, I'm going to speak. I think we did a few.
Yeah, we did. We replaced 5 of the light poles, but we didn't replace the lighting fixtures on them. So this would be the electrical infrastructure that's underground, bringing the electricity out to the poles, replacing all the poles, and then all the ballasts and lights with LED lights.
There for $780,000, and then a fence for $660,000. The public safety headquarters, again, this is just the renovations. I know month and a half back or so, there was a study session that talked about expanding some of the needs. This is just repairing what they currently have. If an expansion were to go forward, some of these items would be reduced, some of them would not. So for example, of that $2.6 million, $750,000 is parking lot security. That's not part of the expansion cost that we talked about before. The paving behind for $440,000. There's a roof in there for $330,000. No, the parking lot security and the paving, and I believe the roof and mechanical systems that are in this plan are still needed items, whether we do the expansion or renovation.
But they weren't in the
It's on top of
presentation?
it, correct.
It's on top of
that.
whatever was presented then? Okay.
Correct. I believe the presentation was, what would have impacted the police fund was about $6 million, I think we came up with. And with these other items, it was $7.6 million. I think the extra items were about $1.6 million that were still needed, regardless which direction the township board decides to head in for an expansion versus renovation. Pheasant Run Golf Course was the next highest one of the 5, and that was $1.9 million. That is to keep, the cart paths are the biggest cost out there to get them up and appropriately maintained was about $1.3 million, and parking lots are about $340,000 of that plan. Was there any question on those items or anything else of the specific plan itself that anybody had looked at?
In terms of other items not there, Greg, we had a conversation, the park.
Correct. Patriot Park is not included in any of this, so the CIP doesn't include any new or expanded facilities. So like the master plan development of Patriot Park would not be included in this plan.
Some items at the summary at the beginning of this that are not included in this plan.
Correct,
right?
on the plan. And I did print off a couple extra copies if people haven't had to share. You're welcome.
So
Yeah, here. I'll keep one of them for me in case there's, I have
just,
to look at it, but there's a couple
I have
extras.
it on here in case it's on there. If it's in this plan, I'm just a little confused with the budget we're going to approve. Does that mean it's going to be in your budget when you, are all these things in this plan going to be in that budget? Or
Yes.
that year, the right year?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the plan. If the board is comfortable with these items, and I'm going to go into a funding, I'm going to show you kind of the 5-year plans of looking at this after answering any questions on the specific items. If the board is comfortable with this, the goal is to give this direction to the staff to add this to the budgets for 2020, make the revisions for the 2020 budget and the 2021, and then potentially issue debt to fund some of these items. So this would be what we're asking the board if they're comfortable with moving forward. And again, this isn't locking in anything. Individual items still have to come before the board in accordance with the purchasing policy. So when we ask for this, we're just asking for this to be a direction for us to start heading to address the existing capital needs that we have.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So for the public safety headquarters, is that factoring in anything for, like the issue brought up with, for the evidence, like the evidence room? Is that included in the, in that number?
That is not included in this number.
No, none of that $2.6 million includes any expansion. It's all replacement of carpet, wall coverings, roof repair, and HVAC are really the primary components of that parking lot paving, as you see, and then some security enhancements. No,
Upgrade to the facilities in the current footprint only.
correct. No expansion of dispatch, no front desk, none of that. None of that is included in that.
No, I thought I remember seeing the parking lot security included in the presentation. That was?
It was in the presentation, but it was not included in the budgetary number that we provided because we were still working on the cost, and there's still some things that we have to work out with engineering in terms of curbs and how that will all play out. So it could come in a little bit less, But that's the ballpark of where we're at today.
They're all estimates.
Yes, you
So
just led into what I was
there's
about to say.
Fluctuation potentially. And kind of the consent for the program doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't lock in these, any specific expenditure. That still comes before the board.
Correct.
Like it normally does for our
Correct.
approval in accordance with the finance policy.
Correct. All the
Purchasing
costs,
policy.
all of the costs are in here, were based on what OHM had used as a best estimate of what the cost was going to be. The team met and made some revisions to those. If they knew there were some more accurate figures, that maybe these were a little bit outdated or had some more realistic expectations, just because they know based on how they've fixed other things. We also added a 10% labor cost to all of these. Some of them are going to take a 10% labor cost, some of them are not going to have any, some might be 20%. So it's just a ballpark estimate. At the end of the day, if we have these items and we say we're going out to bid for these items this year, and they come in significantly higher, we're going to have to come to the board and say, here's what we're looking at out of this plan, here's what we're looking at doing. These are the ones we're thinking about pushing off a year. So again, it's just a plan, or here's some options to make some changes. So again, one of the items at the summit, the copper roof, I think was in there at $1.2 million or so. There are alternatives to copper roofs that aren't copper, but maybe give the same sort of appearance that might be half that price. I don't know that, but we're going to entertain some of those things so the board can make a decision on maybe they don't want a copper roof anymore, maybe they want the alternative. I think St. Joseph has an alternative copper roof, the urgent care at the corner of Palmer and Canton Center Road. You know, if the board likes the looks of that and that can work over there, I think that's a probably significantly cheaper alternative than a copper roof.
Can I just ask another accounting question?
Sure.
So we're calling this a capital improvement plan, but like our fixed asset policy defines capital as an item of $5,000 or more, but I see that we're spending $3,918 at Barchester Park.
That is on there because it's in the ADA plan, and we wanted to make sure all the ADA plan items were specifically listed
All right,
in here.
that's my last question.
No, they're good questions.
Can I ask Karen anything else? Just as a question, so the Pheasant Run Golf Course, obviously you're saying cart pass. Do we use any of the monies generated from the golf course to pay for any of this at all, or do we not have?
Yeah,
any?
the golf course, what we do every year, when the golf course funds, when we come up with the budgets and the budgets are created and we bring it forth to the board, we always look at what we're expecting the revenues and expenses to be. And then obviously we always transfer money in from the general fund to subsidize it at the end of the day, because you've seen that transfer. At the end of the day, we are subsidizing the golf courses. But we always look to see what it actually needs to be subsidized. We don't just automatically transfer $1.3 million from the general fund. If we think they can cover that within their own budgetary demands, they do that first. So if, with their own revenues, we would do that first. But at the end of the day, a $1.3 million capital is likely going to be funded from the general fund. They pretty much break even on their operations, and the capital items are what the township puts forth in there.
Okay, are there alternatives to cart paths out there yet? I know I've gone to some of the older courses that don't have asphalt. It's more of like a gravel, a hard gravel.
I do dollars, Greg?
It really depends on the course and the quality of the course. So a course like Fellows Creek has portions of it that have paths. So they have paved portions, and then there's gravel portions, and then there's portions without cart paths. Pheasant Run was built a little bit higher end, has cart paths from tee to green and all the way in between in there. And if we were to look at an alternative like gravel or those sorts of things, I think it would have a significant impact on the neighborhoods with dust, noise, and other issues, and probably have an impact on revenue with the overall quality of the course going down. So that is something that people are, if you're going to have that. Pheasant Run is also one consideration there, is the number of people that are going to be riding carts versus walking. And Pheasant Run, because of the distance between the holes, it's required that you take a cart. We don't allow walkers on the course. Fellows Creek is going to be a course where you have a portion that are on carts and a portion that are walking, so it doesn't have as much wear and tear on the course. If you were to go to if you didn't have cart paths or you only had gravel paths, you're going to have a lot more wear and tear on your course itself as well, especially if you think about a rainy day where we require them to keep the carts on paths only. If there aren't paths or there's gravel, they're going to be out on the fairway.
Speaking of Pheasant Run, so can you remind us, if I remember right, it was covering its costs, but not the bond? Is that right?
That's
Is
correct.
it still the case?
That's correct. It pretty much can cover all of its operational needs. It does not handle the bond. And when we had the initial large bond, we weren't spending much capital out at the golf course. And now that bond's paid off, we need capital. You know, there's no replacement because the general fund was already paying the debt. So now that the debt's paid off, it's kind of going towards the capital.
Is the bond fully paid off?
The last one is paid off this 2020 or 2022?
I want to say 2022.
2020 for Pheasant Run,
2020 for Pheasant Run.
I believe.
There's 3 different bond issue. I think one expired in 18, one in 20, and one in 22.
You're right, you're right. There's one that goes through
One
22 at
next year
Pheasant
and
Run.
then one.
Correct.
Okay. So are we going to have to make a decision on this based in the 2020 budget?
Correct. And I can
Okay.
show you the funding plan. and-
Okay.
And that may make you
For-
more comfortable when I
Yeah.
show you the funding plan. Because
And-
I have it
Okay.
down here.
I just wanted to understand those Pheasant Run numbers if
Yes.
we're going to look at that, so.
Yep.
Okay,
I completely understand.
thanks.
You're welcome. So the total by fund, again, this is in your packet. The total general fund at the bottom here is combining the general fund, the community center fund, and the golf course fund, because for the most part, the general fund subsidizes all of those. So the total general fund impact is about $18 million, 17.9. That's on page, did you not put the, oh, I did not tell the truth. We didn't include that one in your
Okay, I
budget. I can
didn't
get you,
think I saw
I can get you a copy of this one. It's not in the whole packet. But it's 17.9 million is a general fund impact. Fire fund was $7 million. That includes the Fire Station 2 renovation. The other 2 fire stations didn't have significant improvements needed over the next 5 years. Police was 3.3 million. Again, community center and golf course are part of the general. We've got the water and sewer fund at 850,000 and the fleet at about 121,000. Fleet, the biggest piece to that is in 2020, they need a new roof. Of that total, here's a summary of the capital by location. So if you take a look at it, the Summit represents about 18% of the total. The administration building is about 5%. All of the fire stations combined are about 24%. Again, it's skewed a little bit because of the Fire Station 2. Public safety is 11%. If you combine all of the parks, it's 19%. Golf courses, that includes both Pheasant Run and Fellows Creek, is 11%. Public Works is 3%, and the others, which were small, total 9%. So again, some of these items that it does include, we talked about the Fire Station 2 renovation. It does include, and this isn't necessarily our current, replacing current needs, but the paving of the parking lot at Cherry Hill Village at the Village Arts Factory, that was in the budget for 2019. It's not going to happen in 2019, so it's included in 2020. There is an expansion of the berm at the gun range that we know is needed. That's an expansion. And that also includes buildings which are currently vacant. So a couple of the smaller ones are the Sheldon School and the Western Wayne Narcotics Building. Western Wayne Criminal Investigations formerly has been in there. And those 2 are vacant. Those do have some needs in there if we're going to maintain those buildings. It does not include public safety administration expansion. It only includes the renovation to the existing or any new construction. So it doesn't include anything that was in the master plan for Patriot Park or Fire Station 4 or any other expansion needs that have been talked about in the past. So what I am proposing at this point in time is that we issue debt in both 2020 and 2021 to help fund the needs. So we don't want to do one large debt issue for a couple of reasons. One, because we don't think we could spend it all quick enough. And two, trying to do this all in 2020 isn't realistic. There's a number of projects. So for example, the summit had a number of items that they said were needs in 2020, but to shut down the summit twice for major renovations in 2020 and 2021 could have a major impact on the operations over there and membership and people keeping coming to the summit. So we moved some of the projects around there between 20 and 21 to have one shutdown for the summit in 2021. And that also gives us time to plan some of these projects. There's not enough time for us to get everything done that we need to get done right away. So we're proposing 2 debt issuances. And I'm proposing at the general fund, we issue $5.5 million over 2 years, well, each year, so $11 million total. The police fund, that we would issue $2.7 million for 2020 if this plan goes forth, and $210,000, and then the fire fund at $2.5 million. So the board last Tuesday approved the fire station renovation. Based on this plan, we're looking to use fund balance for the majority of it and then issue debt for $2.5 million. So we'd be looking at a total debt issue in 2020 of $10 million, $10.7 million potentially, and $5.7 million in 21, if everything went according to what this plan is. So I'm about to get into what the financial projections look like with issuing debt and doing the capital as proposed here. Again, all of that issuing debt and any of the actual proposed changes would come before the board before anything happens. In the financial projections, we've got property taxes growing at either the known or average inflation. So we already know what the inflation is for this upcoming year. So we factored into what the actual property values are going to be. And by working with municipal services and the assessors, calculated out what we think the new construction is going to be and how that's going to impact our revenue. We assumed the wages were going to increase by 2%, plus any applicable steps according to the merit policy or the union contracts. We assume the medical and pension costs are going to increase at a rate of 10% per year. We assumed under these scenarios that we're issuing debt for 10 years and have an interest rate at 4%. That's probably a little, based on today's rates, that's a little bit high, but conservative. This is also assuming, and you'll see that paying an additional $8 million into MERS between general fund, police fund, and fire fund to help address our legacy costs. That would actually take us from about a 64% funded level to MERS to a 70% funding level based on the 2018 valuation.
Is that over that 10 years?
We're talking about doing that. If the board's okay with this, then I would be bringing a resolution in the next couple of meetings to pay down a MERS in 2019.
Okay.
By that much, by 8 million.
$8 million between the 3 funds, and I'll show you that broken out of these funds. Not only does that help, address our legacy costs, that actually reduces our future year's payments, our annual costs, which can actually help pay for the debt, and you'll see that in these projections. It includes a $500,000 contingency in the general fund only. I did that just as, we budget a contingency, but because I was trying to do some projections, I wanted to add a little something in case one of my numbers came way off. And it does include an estimation of capital other than infrastructure. So we just talked about the needs for infrastructure, but it does include an estimation for vehicles, furniture and fixtures, office equipment, and computers based on some historical spending and some known upcoming items that we still need. So we didn't ignore all other capital. We did build some of that into this future plan. These are little numbers, so if you turn around and look at the big screen, it might be better for you. So this is the general fund projection, and I love spreadsheets, and I'm sure not everybody loves them as much as I do. But if you look at the 2016, 2017, and 2018 are the first 3 columns. Those are actual numbers, and that's actually the fund balance percentage, and that's a total fund balance percentage. So it's high, but it's because we've set aside, I'm including the fund balance money that has been put aside to help address legacy costs and capital. Because if you recall, we've always been transferring money at the end of the year over to address these items. That's why that's big, because now we're here. So based on the projection at in 2019, if you kind of look the middle of the spreadsheet, about middle of the way down, you can see there's a number. Here, let me see if I can use my mouse and kind of circle it. Ooh, kind of glitchy, but this number right here, that 327, 850, that's where I'm projecting in 2019 that the fund is going to end up, that we're going to have a loss of about $327,000. If you recall, we budgeted to use about $2 million of fund balance, so it's not concerning. We're not in violation of the budget. It's still better than what we projected or budgeted to use. If we pay down $2 million into MERS for pension funding, that's going to bring our fund balance at the end of the year to 63%. Now, the numbers are skewed a little bit. The top number, now that I look at that, was just the general fund balance. The combined general fund balance at the bottom where it says $20 million, that is including at that point in time the capital, the community improvement fund. If you take a look at the 2020 projection, I'm projecting that we're going to lose about $500,000, $559,000. So now I'm back here. Initially, when I was doing this, I had just said we're going to use, what if we issued capital each of these individual years? This is the exact amount. Thank you. Thank you. He gave me a laser pointer. People, look out. So that, I don't think it works very well.
We can see it, actually.
Could you see it?
Yeah, it was there.
It like comes and goes.
Okay.
Just gotta push that button.
I was
Push
trying.
hard.
Push it harder. My thumbs are going to be sore. Okay, these numbers came right off of that capital plan, 5.3 million, 5.6 million, 3.2, and 2.5. If we did that, our fund balance would have been very low right away at 2020 and 2021. So basically, I added them back right here just to show that I put them here and I put them right back out. But this next line item shows if we issued debt for $5.5 million in 2020, our first payment is likely going to be in 2021 of $690,000. Then if we issued debt again in 2021, basically double that. I'm telling you, I'm pushing this.
We
There
can
it
see
is.
it.
Okay. If you double it, then it comes to the $1.3 million, 1.3. So, and then at the bottom here, we added, which at the end of the day, I will likely add it to the capital plan as just a miscellaneous. These are just some miscellaneous preventative maintenance dollars that we already build into the budget just for things, emergencies that pop up, for rooftop units, for mechanical and electrical type items that we might not necessarily have built into the plan, but we want. At the end of the day, issuing this plan for the general fund, seriously, I'm having problems with this. At the end of the day, at the end of the 5 years, our fund balance at the general fund would be about 12%. What this doesn't do for this fund only, and you'll see I got some numbers for MERS for the police fund and fire fund because it's easier to do for them because they have, you could just price out what it would be to make a lump sum into the police division of MERS and the fire division of MERS to see how that would impact their budget. This one's a little bit more complicated because we've got TPOEM, AFSCME, and Merit divisions with MERS. That is likely going to save us about $100,000 to $150,000 a year of annual costs would be my estimation. So when we're showing this, this does not include, we always get a refund from MMRMA. Since I've been here, we've gotten a significant chunk back from MMRMA. This also does include the $500,000 contingency that we haven't spent to date. And it does not include the MERS, the savings from MERS pension funding. So at the end of this 5-year plan, while our fund balance is below the board goal of 15%, it doesn't include some of these items that I think is going to raise that up. And since this is really a moving target and just a plan at this point in time, this is going to be updated every year. So once we have actual figures, if we say, oh gosh, there's a recession, what are we going to do 2021? We're not saying right now we're going to issue debt in 2021 for sure, without a doubt, and we're not asking the board to obligate, future boards or this board to anything like that. It's just a plan. So with this plan, and knowing we have time to make any adjustments that we do, this is what general fund, I think the worst case scenario, barring any recessions, would look like at the end of a 5-year cycle. One thing that's very important to note is that in 2024, what's not shown here is our largest debt issuance is going to fall off the books. Our last payment is in 2023, and that's for $2 million. So we pay annually $2 million for debt. Our last payment is going to be in 2023. To add out another column, when you talk to anybody about financial forecast, they really say forecasting out anything past 3 years there's not much point. So trying to add another column to show what was going to happen in 2024 we just don't know what that looks like at this point in time. So next year I'll project out to 2024 as well, and we would show the same thing to the board, because what I envision happening is doing the same type of a presentation, not in quite as much depth, but having the same presentation in a year for the board and say, all right, this year's done, here's what it looks like for next year, and here's what the funding plan would look like.
By truing up annually, as you get closer to your dates, the vision or the clarity improves, so.
Correct.
Can I ask, when was the last year we used the $500,000 contingency?
We have never used it. We put it into the budget at the end of the day, if we got a large expense in after the year was done. A number of years ago, let me even back up, a number of years ago, I had asked all of the departments to really hone in on their budgets and look at them. So we were trying to project out and really know what departments we're going to need at the end of the day. What we basically said at that point in time was, a lot of people were very uncomfortable when they said, you're asking me to cut my budget by this amount, you're not giving me any wiggle room. And I said, we're not giving you wiggle room and you wiggle room and you wiggle room. We're going to make one pot of money in case we truly need it. If we truly need it, we'll dip into it. This year was questionable whether we might have needed to dip into it because of the Liberty Fest, all the rain and the repairs we had to do to the park, but Greg was able to find other areas where he could use other budget dollars. So we have always been encouraging departments to use their existing budget dollars before we dip into the contingency, but we've got it in case of an absolute emergency and at the end of the year if an unknown expense comes in that we weren't expecting, so we're not out of compliance with the Budgeting Act from the state of Michigan.
You may have explained this to me before, but if we were $1 million in the red last year, is that what that 1 million
Yep.
is? That shows, how did we not use that $500,000 contingency in that year?
We had budgeted to spend, to use $3 million.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Do you remember how much the last refund check from MMRMA was?
In total, it's in the slides.
Like 100,000?
It averages,
900?
the average between all funds was $640,000, but that gets spread between all the funds that have to pay the liability. The police fund makes the biggest contribution into that, and so the police fund gets the largest distribution back. The general fund, I believe it's about a $100,000 refund.
And with the current legal activity we have, there is some nervousness on my part on where that thing's going to head, right? So talk about that.
Are you comfortable with the general fund? Can I move on to the fire fund?
When you mentioned $8 million pension funding, and there's two there, is the other coming from? Okay,
Yep, the other is coming from the other funds.
okay.
So the next one is the fire fund. So again, we have the same kind of format, 2016, 17, and 18. I'm actually projecting at the end of 2019, we're going to add to fund balance by about $1.7 million. And I'm requesting that we pay $4 million out of the fire fund into MERS. The fire division is funded at 59%. I'm not sure what this would get them up to, but as a whole, the whole township would go from 64 to 70%. So I'm asking for that. Did anybody see this? I'm using this. I can see the mouse. All right. So if we pay this $4 million into MERS, I did contact MERS to see what the annual savings was going to be of a reduction in our annual costs, and it would be to the tune for the fire fund of $300,000 a year. So that would save that. So again, if we have the capital from the CIP plan of the 63,000, 151,000, 151 again, and then 48,000. There's also the request for an extra battalion chief position. This is the cost of that. Fire Station 2, I'm proposing we use $3.9 million of fund balance and issue $2.5 million of debt. And that annual payment, if we issued the $2.5 million of debt, that would be a $315,000 annual debt cost. You can see that paying the amount into MERS pretty much pays for the debt payment moving forward. And part of that reason is what we pay MERS is accruing an interest rate of 7.75 or 7%? 7%, somewhere around the 7% range. So we're paying our legacy cost at 7%. If we can issue debt at 4%, it basically pays for itself. So at the end of the day, for the fire fund, with this plan, their fund balance, if you look at the bottom right corner of 2023, that would leave them with a fund balance of 20%. Is there any questions on this one?
So the fund balance is being so high. When we get our reports from the auditors, help me remember, is that what they're telling us our fund balances are at?
This
And
fund balance would match the audit report.
it does, and so.
At
and
18.
They're, for 18,
Yeah.
yeah. So we're at 56%
Correct.
fund balance. Were they recommending that we spend some of that to get down to more recommended levels, or?
They were very well aware of our legacy cost issues and the fire station, when we talked to them, that we are going to be spending money on a fire station as well. So yeah, they would be concerned about a very high fund balance level, especially in a special assessment fund. But the fact that we can pay down our legacy costs and fire station, that brings
So this is
down a
what they
concern.
would-
This is exactly what they would,
Recommend we use it for?
Right.
To do that, okay.
yep, and you'd always want to use fund balance for a one-time expense. You don't want to rely on fund balance for your recurring costs. The using fund balance is really intended to be for one-time types of
Do you
expenditures.
remember how low our fund balance got during the recession or anything like that?
I don't think our fund balance ever dipped beneath the 15%, because of all of the things that the township did to help address the needs, as far as furlough days and reducing the pension costs, as far as deferring capital. But that's why we're in the position, part of the reason we're in the position today, because we deferred so much capital.
Thank you.
Any questions on the fire fund? Okay, I'm going to flip to the police fund.
I'm sorry, that 3.9 million, that's the up-to-date cost for Fire Station 2, correct?
3.9 plus 2.5, plus the 2.5 that we're going to issue in debt, but we're not paying 2.5 in 2020. We're going to pay the $315,000 a year.
Right. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And now for the police fund, we've got the same thing, the 2019 projection. I'm projecting that we add to fund balance of about $228,000. If we paid $2 million into MERS, that leaves us with fund balance of about 26%. As I said, I was proposing issuing debt for their portion as well of about $2.9 million over 10 years with 4% interest. That would result in approximately $366,000 per year of interest cost. If we paid that $2 million in, this was the savings that MERS had given us year over year as well. Doesn't quite offset the debt issuance, but it gives us, helps pay for that. And then this is also replacing one sergeant position with a lieutenant position, which is a need of the Public Safety Department. At the end of this 5-year plan, the fund balance is uncomfortably low, a little bit uncomfortably low, because it's at 8.5%. However, just recall that they get the largest payment from MMRMA, and they would average about $500,000 of the total, 400,000, maybe $400,000 of the total. So if we got the $400,000 in 2021, 2022, and 2023, and there's, other than some outstanding lawsuits, as long as all that continues, that's going to pay for itself. And again, this would be looking at this, we'll be looking at this year over year over year and making any adjustments that is necessary.
And this debt would be for the fire station improvements then?
This would be for the
I'm sorry, police.
the police administration renovations on the existing only. This does not count an expansion.
Can you walk me through what's going on with the revenue here, why it's decreasing at the top?
The revenue is not decreasing, the net income is decreasing, and that would be because the revenue is not increasing as much as the expenses. So if we're expecting the revenue the property taxes to increase at about a 1% to 2% rate each year, it's really about 3% with the growth. But we're expecting the payroll costs to go up by 5% per year, pensions to go up 10% per year, medical costs to go up by 10% per year. That's what happens That's what that primary difference is. If anything comes in different, you know, the last couple of years, the inflation has been pretty good. You know, we've had a couple of years of 2.4%, and 2% one year. I mean, that doesn't sound great, but it's better than it has been. But if you look at the average, it's about 1.5%. So I used for 2021, 2022, and 2023, I used the 1.5% because when you look at the average over a 10-year cycle, and even just from 2010 to now, it's about 1.5%. So that's why I use that. But we're going to know at the end of September, at the end of October, we're going to know what next year's inflation factor is already going to be. So that could change something just, you know, just like that. But we don't have that number yet for 2021.
Are these these are not in the packet, are they? These spreadsheets?
They are not, and I can provide, yeah, I can send this whole packet to you guys for you to reference.
Thanks. When you do that, would you just mind writing where you're issuing debt for, especially with the police, is just for the current improvements, not for the,
Yeah, sure.
would you just mind noting that?
Yeah, sure. All of these items are only issuing debt for what's in the CIP plan. It's no expansion, so other than the expansion items that were noted in the CIP plan, such as the parking lot, the berms at the gun range, I think those are the two main expansions.
Thanks.
Any questions on that?
An 8.58% fund balance at the end of this?
Again,
2023?
that's not taking into consideration that we have been getting 400,000 or so of MMRMA. And I can, if I flip to the next slide, you know, other factors, it does not include the refund from MMRMA, which is an average of 640,000 for the last 3 years. I can, when I email this out to you guys, I can let you know how much that means to the police, to the different funds. Again, it does include, on the general fund side, it does include the $500,000 contingency in the general fund only, so that traditionally has not been used, and that the general fund does not include the annual savings from the MERS for paying down legacy costs. And the point of this slide is really the other factors, is to just say, I think all of these slides, again, these are all looking into the crystal ball, and there's a lot of assumptions used, and if any one major assumption changes, it can drastically impact this, which is why we look at this every year. I think it's conservative because of these items. I purposely didn't add these in because I didn't want to count on all of these items every year, just in case we needed to. I didn't want to make the budget so tight that if we ended up in an emergency situation, we were going to be scrambling in any year. I'll go back to the police side because we were just talking about that one. Is there any questions on that?
On just police, or are we talking about?
Just the police one, because I flipped ahead before. Okay, that was really all that I was going to cover, again, except just reiterating that this was on existing infrastructure. This is just a plan. This does not mean, when we ask the board to accept this, this is not saying that we're not going to bring anything back before the board, because the board is key in everything. According to our purchasing policy, you have to approve the individual purchases. You have to approve if we're going to issue debt. It has to be posted in the newspaper for people to question it. This is just really giving management a roadmap for a direction that the board is comfortable and where our priorities and what we're focusing on looking at. This document is a very important thing that we publish because our rating agencies are going to look at it. If we go forward with issuing debt, they're going to want to see this plan and say, what are you planning on spending this money on? They're going to want to see it. So it's really important that what gets adopted, we know, or we have for the rating agencies. It's a very important thing at this point in time, which is one of the reasons why we really went forward with this project, and to give management a tool for moving forward.
And I don't remember the exact numbers, and maybe Josh can help with if we do the expansion of the public safety area, that all-in number was 7 million as opposed to the 2.6.
The preliminary estimates that we gave to the board at the study session was 7.5 million, keeping in mind that 1.5 million of that would be covered by 911 fund balance dollars. Dispatch, yep, 911 funds.
Yeah, it was about $6 million of it was from the police fund.
So we've got in this plan currently 2.6, just to rehabilitate current footprint. If we wanted to do the complete blowout, there's another 3.4 million we'd have to.
It's more than that because we have to still build in the parking lot pavement, the infrastructure. So it actually does bring it up to more like 7.6.
That would require a little creativity on how you would fund that if we go
Right.
that direction. A lot of creativity, but it could be done.
Right. So the plan that we're asking to adopt is just basically identifying that these are existing infrastructure needs that we have. It's not talking about any expansion, doesn't mean the board can't change the priorities, doesn't mean management won't come forward and say, this is what was in our plan, but this doesn't make sense anymore because we have these other factors of something that we know about. That still could happen. And if the board direction is, even if this plan gets adopted and the board's like, I'm not approving the budget with this in it because I don't like this, that's the board's decision.
And kind of in the same vein as the public safety admin is the Patriot Park. What was the last number that you floated?
About 6.5 million.
Discussion we had internally was every department has really neat, wonderful.
Quick, and I'm sure, I don't know if you've answered this, if we did decide to do the expansion on the admin building instead of just renovating, we still could do that, let's say, next year or
If we were going to do an expansion, we would have to look at our current funding and seeing what we could and couldn't afford and talking to the board
Sure.
about what that would look like, or what that could do to fund balance, what we could or couldn't do, and we would bring that, if that's the board direction that they want to see that, absolutely, I'll show a similar scenario, and Director Meyer and I would sit down and talk about, some creativity things we could maybe try to come up with funding. We're not saying that it would never be done. This is just identifying what was identified in the CIP project for existing renovations.
I have some questions, if I can.
Yeah.
So for the unoccupied property, we
Yes.
talked about Western Wayne, for example.
Yes.
I see in 2020, we're looking at spending about $192,000 potentially at that location.
That one
we have a plan?
specifically, Jade and I are going to take a tour maybe tomorrow. I don't know, Josh, if you're going to try to join us or not. Do a walkthrough. We may wind up just selling it, not even putting the money into it. Sell it as is. So that's something.
There's no
we're-
plans for that
We're thinking
build?
about. Well, number one, we're going to there's been estimates made by what the repair costs, bring it up to snuff. But currently, there's no activity program for that building today. So it's an asset that's really on our books that doesn't add value today unless something's changing that I'm not aware of, Josh or Jade. But
So we have no plan for the
there's
building?
no plan for the building, so there may be an opportunity to get that potential expense off our books, right?
I would say before we spend the $192,000, we probably get a plan for that building. My other issue, so for Sheldon School, which is apparently vacant currently, we had a tenant there, if I'm not mistaken. I thought there was like a Head Start that was working out of there, so they're not
Yeah,
there
they-
currently, but could they, they could potentially be a tenant in the future, right? I mean, it's a historic building, so that's one thing, but.
Yeah, there was a daycare operating out of the facility. Kristen Thomas has had inquiries every couple months. People ask, what is that property? Can I rent it? Can I lease it? We just haven't locked anybody in.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Dr. Holmberger can probably speak to this, but I think there are some limitations for who can really occupy it, because the parking needs to be updated, the stormwater needs to be updated if we do some of these, depending on the tenant, it doesn't allow for a significant amount of parking on that. Based on the current envelope, there's not enough parking on that area for a lot of places to go in there.
Daycare was about perfect.
And I see it's built in here, and it's after the next election, so it might be a different board that decides that anyway, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And, depending on who goes in there, the group that was in there before was Head Start. And because of that type of organization that it was, it did qualify for CDBG dollars to be used for some of that. So we used to be able to use some of our CDBG dollars for it. But now that there's nobody in there that qualifies for that type of purpose, we cannot use CDBG dollars for it, just because it's a historic property. The reason we were able to is because of the tenant who was in there.
Yeah. So that's my questions. Other than that, I will say, I love the idea of a township-wide plan. A lot of times we do our long-term planning in silos, and this is easier to digest and understand. So good job to everybody who put the
Yeah,
hours in
yes.
on this one.
These guys, they did a lot of work.
This is a plan, this is not, something similar to this will be presented to the board for approval soon?
Yes, we are hoping to bring this before the board for acceptance, and we'll carefully word the model resolution so everybody's comfortable that we're not saying that this is, written in stone and this is
Yeah,
it.
right.
We're going to be very careful with the model resolution, but we're looking to do that before bringing the budget before the board, because we want to work in the items into the 2020 and 2021 budget before it comes back before the board.
The numbers you're projecting are conservative numbers, I would assume.
The numbers on the projections, I believe, are conservative.
The fund balance, which is an important element within there, is there a number that you'd like to shoot for, or a percentage?
Well, the board has adopted a fund balance policy of 15%. So that keeps us above that level for all years but the last year. We have time to adjust, and for those of you who are on the board prior, we did this before making any of the millage adjustments. We kind of had a 5-year plan and looked to see what it was going to do, and said we were going to keep looking out every year to see what this looked like at the end. So if we were had a problem at the end, we had time to adjust. Based on that 5-year plan, we didn't have any problems. We were still within the fund balance levels that we wanted to be at. So yeah, I do think there's some conservative numbers in there, because medical costs, we are self-funded. You get a couple bad illnesses, severe, significant illnesses, that shoots our costs up. If you have the average number that we have, our costs probably aren't going to go up at 10% per year. But we don't want to assume that it's not going to be 10% per year. So that's why I think our wages are in the ballpark. I think where we might have some flexibility is medical, the contingency, and then the MMRMA refunds would be big ones. MERS, they're updating their actuarial assumptions. I think a 10% increase for the MERS is actually a reasonable assumption. When I said the pension costs are going up 10%, I actually think that's reasonable. We'll see.
Funding of MERS, is there a percentage, a goal that they demand or that we'd like to?
The overall funding level, which you like to be, is at 80%. This plan will get us to 70%. There's a lot of municipalities that are hovering around the 70% mark. So this would get us to about the average of where the average municipalities would be if we contributed that $8 million. The goal would really be to 80%. I mean, the goal would really, from MERS perspective, they want you at 120%. They want you over that. But as far as a comfortable funding level,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the supervisor for Northfield Township, at a meeting I think we attended, said that they were 100% funded in MERS. Is that possible?
Yeah,
it's possible.
What did they do to get out to?
They made it a priority.
They did make it a priority. They were making extra contributions. So in years and people who were employees, when we switched to MERS, when the MERS, we had been paying, I think, 15%, the township had been contributing 15% to an employee, to a defined contribution. When we switched to MERS came back and said, oh, you only need to contribute 3%. Well, instead of continuing to contribute the 15%, we contributed the 3%. If a community, I would love to get to a point where we're funded at 100% and we say, we know it's going to cost us an average to contribute 10% for employees. Even if it comes in and says it's 3%, I'd rather contribute the 10%, because at the long run, we know that's the true cost of a defined benefit. We're not there. But I don't know that that's what Northville did, but I would assume Northville did something like that and prioritized making some lump sum
The
contributions.
history of Canton Township, Tom Yak and a lot of guys like Tom Yak, and I'm not slamming them because it's happened across our country, didn't understand when they got into these pension debts what they were creating. And Tom Yak will tell you with a straight face, and he thought pay-as-you-go was the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And when Phil and you and I came in 2008, because we came from other worlds, we said, time out, not correct. And then we began to pay down. So the gap closure that we have made on the unfunded liabilities is flipping huge, guys, since 2008, 9, 10,
Yeah.
through today. Incredible
Without stealing your
progress.
thunder, I do have a clarification question about the
Don't do
pension.
that.
We have been paying down annually a certain amount. Is the $2 million of the general fund on top of what we have been budgeting paying, or is it including what we?
We have been paying down lump sum into OPEB.
OPEB.
extra into OPEB.
Gotcha.
What we have done, when MERS came forth 3 years ago, maybe, with some of their actuarial changes, and they said, you know, these are significant costs to municipalities that we know are about to increase because people are living longer, and they updated the mortality tables and decreased the interest rate. It was going to be a significant cost increase to the municipalities. They gave municipalities an option to phase that in over 5 years, and we said, we want to rip the Band-Aid right now. So instead of phasing that in over 5 years, which they were allowing us to, we said, let's do it now, do it all now. So we started that. So we have been chipping away a little bit at the MERS, but really what we were trying to do is get some of the money into OPEB, because that was the one area that was really lacking. We were at, 4% funding or 6% funding in the OPEB. So we've really been trying to make some strides at getting that in a better funding position as well.
Do you ever see us getting to 100%? Or is there a number that is comfortable but not crazy?
I do see us at this point in time with our funding strategy getting to 100% of OPEB based on our $1 million extra that we've been doing every year. And at the end of each year, we've been doing a little bit more than $1 million. So even though we've kind of stuck with the budget of $1 million, if all the money we've been transferring into the post-employment benefit fund to help pay for our medical costs, if those costs have been coming in under budget, we've been transferring extra money over to MERS, bringing it to the board, and asking to transfer an extra amount. The funding plan, it was a ways out there, but when we asked our actuaries to say if we contributed an extra $1 million each year, when would we be at 100% funded? And I believe it was about 20 years out.
20 years
was what they had said.
originally.
Yeah. So
Oakland County, I understand, bonded to make it 100%. Is that a fiscally responsible way to go or not?
there's different.
Because it's a cost, it's a tax that we're going to pay if we go that way.
There's different theories on that. There's a couple things. The plan has to be closed, which our plan is mostly closed, but people still get life insurance, and that's considered a benefit. So I'm not sure if legally we could bond, because people still get health, dental, retiree dental, and they still get life insurance. That people do not get, retirees don't get medical insurance anymore, and that's where the savings is. I think that's a comfort level. I think it's worked well for some places. Oakland County, it worked very well for when they issued their debt and the economy was booming. They did it, they had right timing. I worked at a large municipality.
You're not recommending that course of action?
I don't. I worked at a large municipality that issued $1.5 billion in debt to pay down their pension, and the next year we went into a recession. So they went from 100% funded to 80% funded in a year. So now they had to pay their debt payments and now have to make up their pension costs. So it's risky. Depending on what you look at, it's risky.
Credit card debt? That's kind of what
So-
you're talking about.
That's an option for our pension.
Well, bonds are, they're paying 4%.
Yeah, it's 4%.
It is,
That's
it's
kind of
low.
low to borrow money.
It is
Almost
the low way to
akin
borrow
to
money.
stealing.
If there's a recession,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden our asset value at MERS goes down, you can go from being 100% funded to 75% funded overnight. So there's places it's worked well,
Yeah.
and there's places it's worked bad. So it's a matter of a board comfort. If that's the direction the board would like to look, we can definitely look into
You're
that.
comfortable with the way it is now, and there's progress being made for that percentage to increase over time.
That has been an item that I have been trying to build into the budgets to make sure we're addressing legacy costs at each year at the board direction. So should the board want to look at issuing debt for the pension, that's obviously something I can look into to see if that's something that, we can do from the pension side. I'm not sure we qualify from the OPEB side, but I can look from the pension.
Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Stephen?
Yeah, thank you. A lot of work. It shows. And, I think all those years after the recession, when we would have our planning sessions and the capital improvement projects would just keep getting pushed off. I think this is when they got pushed off to, and when we always said when we had the money, we would start doing these things. And so I think it's important to do them because we don't know when the next chance we're going to get. So I appreciate you guys putting the plan together to do that. You said this took a year and a half to put together. is there some kind of process now to keep it up to date over time, so we don't have to do it all at once again, or?
So funny you should ask that. Sarah and I recently had this conversation, and what we wanted to do is make sure the board is comfortable with the plan as it's currently designed, and the plan is to keep the process going forward. We're going to add each year, we're going to have the same team is going to be together, meeting with the different departments to see what the needs are, see what the identified needs are, and talk with the departments, and we're going to bring it before the board each year. And my goal would be sometime in this time frame, maybe in August, maybe July, sometime in that timeframe, so we have plenty of time to make budget adjustments. So ideally, we would have done this earlier than September. We had to get it to a good place, because it was a lot of work getting it to here, but year by year, it should hopefully not require weekly meetings for 2 hours each week.
Yeah, right.
But it could, we'll see.
Well, I appreciate the creativity financially and doing both this and the legacy costs stuff. And I just think there's no time that's going to ever be better than now in history, in recent history, to be able to do something like this. So I think it's important to do.
And if the board is comfortable, then I would propose that in the next 2 meetings, we bring a resolution forward to actually make the MERS contributions.
Any other questions, comments?
No, thank you very much. It was very, and the spreadsheets really helped clear it up.
Oh, thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you. And I will get the whole presentation out to the board so you can see it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, comments, there is no public, so no public comment this evening. Staff, any directors, statements, any closing remarks? Well done, everybody. I'd like to call for a motion now to go into closed session.
Mr. Supervisor, I move that the board go into closed session for the purposes of discussing items exempt from the Open Meetings Act under Section 8H of the Open Meetings Act.
Good.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, have a good one,
Thank you, Sarah.
Sarah.
Brad, good job. Even have you would say verbatim. Up and down with the temperature. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Diane,
Diane?
You asked them people
here she comes.
what they would want to do with that money. It wouldn't be to give it to DDA. Some of that artsy stuff.
I do like the Pistons, though. I'm living for
Well, I did, yeah, I would,
Kate wasn't feeling well, did she tell you?
Yeah, she went to the hospital yesterday.
but they've been going along all
Today.
these years with
Oh,
all this
today?
stuff.
She
Yeah.
went again?
Well,
Oh,
do you,
oh, no, you're right, it was last night.
we're not going to.
Yeah, she called me yesterday
more
afternoon.
cops.
I was
I
at
want more
work.
fire
She told me
engines.
she was driving in the hospital. She's
I
freaking
would like to
out.
call for a motion to
Okay.
move from closed session back to open session.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So, second.
Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Good night, everybody. Be safe.
She's okay.
Good night, Mrs.